That night, her perfume still clung to my skin. But it wasn't meant for me. I could taste the lie in the air before I even saw them together. And when I did, I didn't break. I smiled, because in that moment I knew exactly how I'd ruin them both. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. They say you can feel a storm before it comes. The air feels heavy, the light fades too fast, and even your skin seems to hum with a strange electricity. That's exactly how the evening felt when my life quietly began to fall apart. My name's Ryan, I'm 32, and up until a year ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I had a wife people envied, a stable job, and a home that smelled faintly of her perfume, the kind you could almost taste when you walked through the door. We met in college, when everything was still loud and bright, and the nights felt endless. She was magnetic back then, the kind of woman you notice without trying. And for years, I told myself she was mine, and I was hers. But lately, something had shifted. It wasn't in the big, obvious ways. No screaming matches. No slamming doors. Instead, it was in the silences. The way she kept her phone angled away when she typed. The way she started spending evenings out, calling them study sessions, for a certification she claimed to be working toward. I wanted to believe her, God, I wanted to, but I've always had a bad habit of noticing things I shouldn't. That night, I was leaning on the kitchen counter, swirling the last of my coffee while she got ready to leave again. Her dress was too much for a library session, too much for anywhere that didn't involve dim lights and lowered voices. She caught me watching her in the reflection of the window and gave me that small, almost teasing smile, the one that made me both love her and doubt her in the same breath. She left with a quick goodbye, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I sat there in the stillness, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing on my chest. I knew I shouldn't follow her. I knew I should just trust. But that night, trust felt like a gamble I couldn't afford. The rain started about 10 minutes into my drive, the kind that makes the streets shine like black glass. I kept my headlights low and my distance even lower, just far enough not to be noticed. She didn't head toward the university library. She didn't even head toward any part of the city that made sense. Instead, she turned down into an older part of town, where the street lamps flickered like they were too tired to stay awake. When she pulled up outside a small, 2-story house, my heart hit a strange rhythm. I watched her step out, clutching her coat close, and head straight to the door. It opened before she knocked. A man stood there, older, confident, the kind of presence that doesn't just fill a doorway, it owns it. And then I saw it. That moment. That touch. Not a handshake. Not a friendly greeting. Something slower, heavier with meaning. Her eyes softened in a way they hadn't for me in months. I sat there in my car, the rain ticking against the roof, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Something inside me went very still, the way a lake freezes over in the dead of winter. It wasn't just some random guy. I recognized him. He was her teacher from a year ago, someone she'd once talked about with respect. Maybe too much respect. And that's when it hit me, whatever this was, it wasn't new. It had been simmering beneath my nose for months, maybe longer. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I wasn't going to just walk away. No. I was going to watch, wait, and find the perfect way to make them both wish they'd never underestimated me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind refused to. I lay there in the dim blue light, listening to her slow breathing beside me. The same woman I'd seen last night in another man's arms was now curled up just inches away, as if nothing had happened. She looked peaceful, but it wasn't the peace of innocence, it was the calm of someone who thought they were untouchable. I studied her face, memorizing every curve and shadow, like I needed to know exactly who she was now. When she finally stirred, she greeted me with the same warm, practiced touch she'd always used. It almost worked, almost made me want to push it all down, to pretend last night never happened. But I wasn't built for pretending, not when the truth had already carved itself into my bones. The day passed in slow motion. She claimed she'd be out again in the evening, but this time I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The part of me that wanted proof had been satisfied. Now I needed something else, leverage. And leverage required patience. I started small. A casual mention of her certification course at dinner, watching her eyes for the faintest flicker of unease. It was there, a tiny twitch in her smile, a slight delay before she spoke. She was careful, but careful people slip eventually. At night, I combed through the laptop she rarely used anymore, finding nothing but old documents and recipes. It was her phone that mattered, but she guarded it like a lifeline. So I waited. 2 nights later, she left it charging in the kitchen while she showered. My hands didn't hesitate. I wasn't looking for messages, I went straight for the gallery. And there they were. Pictures that told me everything without a single word. Smiles too intimate for friends. Touches that didn't belong to me. The kind of images you couldn't unsee once they'd burned themselves into your head. I sent copies to a secure drive, my own private vault. It wasn't about confrontation anymore, it was about setting the stage. You can't strike too soon or the impact dulls. You have to let the prey get comfortable, unaware of the shadow over them. Over the next week, I learned his name, Daniel Harper, and his life unraveled on my desk in the form of printed files, social media screenshots, and bank statements. He had a spotless public image. A respected academic, loved by his students, trusted by his peers. The kind of man whose downfall would cause ripples. The thought made me almost smile. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I became the attentive husband again. I cooked her favorite meals, listened to her meaningless little stories, brushed my fingers against her hand when we passed each other in the hall. If she noticed the sudden warmth, she didn't question it. She thought she'd won. But in the quiet moments when she looked away, I watched her the way a predator watches the tree lean, patient, unmoving, waiting for the right moment to lunge. Because I knew something she didn't. Revenge tastes better when it's served cold. But it's unforgettable when it's served slow. People think revenge is just about anger, about blowing up and striking fast. That's a rookie move. The real kind of revenge, the one that leaves scars they can't hide, is built like a long game of chess. Every move is calculated, every piece placed exactly where you want it before you make your first strike. For the next few days, I became a man with two faces. At home, I was warm, easygoing, even a little softer than usual. I started bringing her coffee in the mornings, sending her random texts during the day, telling her she looked good even when she was just in an old sweater. It wasn't because I still loved her, it was because I wanted her guard down. I knew her patterns, her habits. I knew she liked to brag to her friends when I was being sweet again, as if my affection was some prize she'd won. I used that to my advantage. The more she thought I was falling deeper into her spell, the more reckless she'd become with him. Daniel Harper wasn't just some random fling. He had a reputation, the kind of man people wanted to be around because he made them feel important. I'd done my research, and it didn't take long to find out he was respected, admired. And maybe just a little too confident in his own untouchable image. That confidence was the crack I was going to split wide open. I started making small appearances in places where I knew he'd be, never too close, never too obvious. A charity event, a university open lecture, a coffee shop near campus. Just enough for him to notice me as a face he'd seen around, without connecting the dots. Meanwhile, I planted seeds through mutual contacts, hinting at my interest in supporting certain academic projects, maybe even funding a grant. I knew his type, ambitious, eager for the next big thing that would elevate his name even further. And I was going to make sure I became that next big thing. At home, I kept up my act. I listened to her talk about her late nights studying, while she sat across from me in clothes that smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I let her lean over me to grab something from the counter, her hair brushing my neck in that way she knew used to make my pulse quicken. I didn't pull away. I smiled. I wanted her to believe I was blind. Because nothing makes a guilty person slip faster than the belief they're safe. And when she slipped, when both of them did, I'd be right there, holding the net they didn't even know existed. When you want to catch someone who thinks they're untouchable, you don't chase them, you make the ground move beneath their feet. That's what I started doing with Daniel Harper. By now, I knew where he worked, where he liked to eat lunch, and even the little Italian place he ordered from on Thursdays. I wasn't stalking him, not in the sloppy, obsessive way amateurs do. I was learning his rhythm. And once you know someone's rhythm, you can start changing the beat. It began with a shared contact. A friend of a friend who owed me a favor mentioned my name to Daniel during a faculty fundraiser. Nothing major, just a casual drop that I was looking to invest in academic programs, and that Daniel might be the perfect person to connect with. The seed was planted. The next week, I made sure to be at the same coffee shop he frequented. I was in a sharp suit, working on my laptop, when he walked in. Our eyes met briefly, the way strangers acknowledge each other without thinking, and I went back to my work. The key was to look like someone important enough not to chase him, but intriguing enough to remember. Meanwhile, at home, I played the doting husband. I asked her about her classes. I offered to drive her to study. I even picked her up once, watching her eyes widen just enough for me to know I'd caught her off guard. She covered it well, but I could feel the slight tremor in her voice. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way most people imagine. I was calm, cold. I'd moved past the stage of wanting to shout or demand answers. Now I was building the walls of the trap, and both of them were walking toward the center without realizing it. A week later, Daniel finally approached me. It was at another public event, a panel discussion on education funding. He struck up small talk, testing the waters, no doubt curious about the man he'd been hearing whispers about. I gave him just enough information to keep him interested, letting him think he was the one making the connection. When we parted ways, he smiled that confident, polished smile of his. I smiled back, hiding the truth behind mine. He thought he'd found an ally. He had no idea he'd just shaken hands with his executioner. It's funny how quickly people let you in when you let them think it was their idea. Daniel was no different. Within 2 weeks, he'd invited me to lunch at a quiet, upscale bistro. The kind of place where people speak in low tones and secrets slip more easily into conversation. I didn't push anything. I asked about his projects, nodded at his frustrations with funding, and casually mentioned that I'd been thinking of supporting certain forward-thinking educators. He lit up like a man who just spotted a winning lottery ticket. Every sentence after that was him trying to sell himself, and I let him. At home, the atmosphere shifted in subtle ways. My wife, blissfully unaware that the walls were closing in, had grown bolder. She left for her classes with a new energy in her step. I caught her humming in the kitchen one morning, the same tune she used to hum for me when we first got together. The irony didn't sting anymore, it just reminded me how much she underestimated me. I started making little moves to bring the two of them into the same orbit without either of them suspecting I was the one arranging it. A small donation to her program through a private sponsor created a reason for Daniel to be present at an event she'd attend. I positioned myself there too, smiling in the right places, shaking hands like the perfect gentleman. The first time the three of us stood in the same small group, I could feel the tension buzzing under the polite chatter. Her eyes darted toward him and then away again, like she was afraid I'd notice. He played it cooler, but there was a faint smugness in the way he held himself, as if standing there with both of us was some private victory. They had no idea the victory was mine. From that point, Daniel began inviting me into more of his professional world, board meetings, lectures, networking dinners. I became a fixture, someone people whispered about as a potential game changer for the department. Every new introduction gave me another thread to pull when the time came. At night, I lay beside her, feeling the faint warmth of her body through the sheets, and thought about how the pieces were falling into place. She thought she was leading two lives. He thought he was securing his future. But both of them were already tangled in my web, and soon, I'd start pulling the strands tighter until they couldn't move. Revenge isn't just about the final blow. It's about erosion, slow, almost invisible damage that weakens the structure until it collapses under its own weight. That's where I was now. I started with Daniel. His world thrived on perception, the image of a flawless, respected educator. So I began planting shadows around the edges of that image. Anonymously, of course. A casual tip to a journalist about questionable research ethics. A quiet email to a donor raising concerns about where their contributions were really going. Nothing concrete enough to accuse, but enough to make them hesitate the next time his name came up. I knew from my research that he valued a handful of high-profile connections. One by one, I found ways to subtly distract or discredit them. A misunderstanding about a meeting schedule here. A document accidentally forwarded to the wrong person there. Little fractures he wouldn't even trace back to me, but he'd start to feel the shift. With my wife, it was different. I needed her distracted, off balance, doubting her own ability to keep her secret safe. I began mentioning Daniel's name casually, like he was just another colleague I'd crossed paths with. I spoke of him in neutral tones, as if he meant nothing to me, but always with a slight pause that left the possibility open that I was curious about him. Once, at dinner, I told her Daniel had suggested a collaboration idea. She froze for a fraction of a second, then quickly masked it with enthusiasm. That one pause told me more than 100 words could. I also started being unpredictably available. Picking her up unexpectedly from class. Changing my schedule so I'd be home when she didn't expect me. Not enough to catch her in the act, but enough to make her nervous about when I might appear. Every move was deliberate, every reaction noted. I wanted her to start second-guessing herself, to feel the walls tightening without understanding how or why. Meanwhile, Daniel kept meeting with me, oblivious to the fact that every casual lunch, every shared drink was part of a carefully constructed file I was building. He'd mentioned frustrations with certain colleagues, small shortcuts he'd taken to save time, and I'd tuck every word away. They thought they were playing me, but I was the one writing the rules of the game. People break in two ways, suddenly like a snapped bone or slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand. My goal was to make them fray first, so when the snap came, it would be spectacular. By now, Daniel was feeling the weight of my subtle sabotage. The donors who once returned his calls in minutes now took days. A faculty member he relied on was suddenly too busy to meet. Rumors floated just low enough to be ignored in public, but high enough to keep him looking over his shoulder. With my wife, it was different. I'd mastered the art of the perfectly timed question, small, harmless on the surface, but sharp enough to make her heartbeat quicken. Questions about her class schedule. Questions about whether she'd seen certain people around campus. Questions about what she thought of Professor Harper's reputation. Always asked casually, always dropped into conversation like stones into deep water. The changes in her were subtle at first. Longer showers, more time on her phone, but less eye contact with me. Once, I came home early and found her sitting at the kitchen table staring into space, her untouched coffee cold in front of her. She didn't even hear me come in until I set my keys down. The cracks between them began to show when I engineered a dinner where all three of us would be in the same room again. A fundraiser, public enough for them to keep up appearances, private enough for me to watch every twitch of their faces. Daniel tried to play it cool, but I caught the faint tightening of his jaw when she arrived late and went straight for the bar instead of greeting him. She avoided his gaze for most of the night, but when their eyes finally met, it wasn't the look of lovers. It was the look of two people who suddenly weren't sure if they were standing on solid ground. That was the first visible sign that my quiet war was working. Trust, the currency they'd been spending freely behind my back, was starting to run out. I didn't need them to fight. Not yet. I just needed them to feel the faint, constant ache of pressure in their chest. The kind that makes every decision harder, every glance suspicious. Because when the moment came for me to end it, I wanted them already weakened, already doubting each other. So they'd have no strength left to defend themselves. A trap is only as good as its reveal. You can catch someone in private and destroy them quietly, but there's no satisfaction in that, no permanence. People forget quiet scandals. But when the world is watching, that's when shame sticks. I had all the pieces I needed. The recordings of Daniel speaking freely in our private meetings. The photos of him and my wife, each one more damning than the last. The records of shady financial decisions buried in the university's grant account. Every thread was strong on its own, together they were unbreakable. The stage I chose was perfect. An exclusive academic gala where Daniel was scheduled to receive an award for ethics in education. The irony tasted better than the finest wine they'd served that night. I made sure I was on the guest list as a major donor, which meant I could bring a +1. Of course, I asked my wife. She said yes without hesitation, thinking this was just another sign I'd softened toward her. The days leading up to it were a study in patience. I didn't push either of them. I let them stew in their own quiet paranoia, each wondering if the other was slipping. I made sure to, accidentally, drop little hints to her about being in touch with Daniel regarding professional matters, and to him about my wife helping me prepare for donor networking. By the time the night came, they were both wound tight, though neither could show it. She wore a dress meant to command attention. He wore the smile of a man who thinks he's untouchable. I arrived early to the gala, greeting the event's AV team with a warm smile and a discreet envelope. Inside were a set of files and a flash drive, every piece of evidence I wanted displayed at the exact moment Daniel stepped on stage. They didn't ask questions. Money tends to silence curiosity. The plan was simple. As the presenter read his glowing introduction, the giant screen behind him would light up, not with his academic achievements, but with the truth. But that wasn't all. Before we left the house, I'd slipped my wife's phone into my pocket while she was getting ready. It took only seconds to transfer every incriminating photo, video, and message onto my own device. I wanted her to stand there, surrounded by strangers, with nowhere to run when her face appeared alongside his. The beauty of it all was that I wouldn't need to say a word. I just watched the trap spring shut while the entire room bore witness. The ballroom glowed with gold light, the air thick with perfume and polished pride. Waiters moved between tables with trays of champagne, their faces expressionless, their steps precise. I could hear the faint hum of conversations, the clink of crystal, the rustle of expensive fabric. It was a room built for appearances, and tonight, appearances were going to shatter. My wife sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her smile rehearsed for the crowd. She thought she looked in control. I didn't mind letting her think that, after all, control is most dangerous when you only believe you have it. Across the room, Daniel worked the tables like a seasoned politician, all perfect posture and easy charm. When the host tapped the microphone and called for everyone's attention, a polite hush fell over the room. The presenter began a glowing speech about Daniel's dedication to ethics and unwavering commitment to his students. The irony was so sharp I could almost taste blood. And then it happened. The first image flashed onto the massive screen behind the stage, Daniel leaning far too close to my wife in what was clearly not an academic setting. There was a ripple in the crowd, a collective intake of breath. Then another image, even less innocent. Then another. Murmurs rose, spreading like a slow fire. The presenter faltered, looking back at the screen in confusion. Daniel froze mid-smile, his eyes locking on the images as the color drained from his face. And then came the recordings. His voice filled the room, calm and confident, talking about bending rules, about how boundaries are flexible when you know how to handle them. The words were damning on their own, but played over the slideshow of photos, they became lethal. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I was watching my wife. Her hand slid off my arm. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, but every exit was blocked by the stares of strangers who now knew exactly what she'd been hiding. The AV team didn't cut the feed. Every file I'd given them rolled out in perfect sequence, financial irregularities, screenshots of messages, photos taken at times she'd sworn she was studying. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was buzzing with whispers, gasps, and sharp intakes of breath. Daniel tried to step forward, maybe to grab the microphone, but someone from the event staff intercepted him. My wife stayed rooted to her seat, her face pale and rigid. And me? I simply lifted my champagne glass, took a slow sip, and let the moment burn itself into memory. I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to point fingers. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could have said. By the time the screen went dark, their reputations were gone, their lies stripped bare in front of everyone who mattered to them. But the night wasn't over yet. The ride home was silent. Not the tense kind of silence that begs for a fight, but the hollow kind, where the air feels thin and every sound is swallowed before it leaves your lip. My wife sat turned slightly toward the window, her hands clenched in her lap. The gold earrings she'd chosen for the gala caught the streetlights now and then, but they looked out of place, like they belonged to someone who didn't exist anymore. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't move right away. I stepped out, unlocked the front door, and let the warm glow of the hallway light spill onto the dark lawn. She followed a moment later, walking as if her shoes were suddenly too heavy. Inside, she finally spoke, her voice raw and low. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an excuse. Just a few broken words strung together like she was trying to piece herself back into someone who mattered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us had said everything hours ago. By morning, the fallout had already begun. Social media feeds lit up with photos from the gala, blurry phone videos of the screen, and half-heard snippets of Daniel's voice. The university released a statement announcing an internal investigation. Donors were withdrawing support. Students were demanding answers. Daniel had gone completely dark, no classes, no public appearances, nothing but a locked office door and a growing pile of unanswered calls. For my wife, the damage was quieter but deeper. Friends stopped answering her messages. Family members who'd once welcomed her now kept their distance. She moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding me but never quite able to leave. Maybe she stayed out of guilt. Maybe because she knew there was nothing waiting for her on the other side. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't strut around claiming victory. I just lived. I cooked my own meals. I went to work. I answered calls. I walked past her in the hallway without a word. She wasn't my wife anymore, just a reminder of what happens when trust rots from the inside out. One afternoon, weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a brief note from the university thanking me for bringing serious concerns to light, along with an invitation to speak to the board about future ethical partnerships. I smiled at the irony. The man who'd thought he could steal behind my back was gone, his career scorched beyond repair, and I was now being courted as the voice of integrity. I didn't take the meeting. I didn't need another stage. I'd already had mine. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The most satisfying kind leaves no trace on you, but every trace on them. And when you finally walk away, you don't look back, because the fire you set will keep burning long after you're gone. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.